excitable tissue. Does anybody know what it means to be excitable tissue?
Movable?
Huh?
Movable?
Movable is one of it, yeah, that would definitely be the muscular system. So excitable means that it is innervated or controlled by the nervous system, meaning that it is able to be excited by an action potential. So first we're going to start off with muscle, and then we will talk about the nervous system, and then we will talk about the special senses of this muscle. When you guys think of muscles, what do you guys think about? So how does our muscular system help regulate homeostasis? Produces heat. What else?
Muscles very metabolic, right? Like compared to fat.
Well, you know, it helps burn calories, right? Which is heat thermogenesis. What else? What else does it do for homeostasis purposes?
Doesn't it? It takes in nutrients and stuff like that.
Well, it requires nutrients. You guys are missing the most obvious thing that our muscular system does.
Temperature?
Huh?
Temperature?
Well, you're talking about heat, right?
It exerts
Exerts what?
force,
Force on what?
external objects.
Internal objects. To do what?
To move.
You guys are overthinking this. Movement, right? That's the number one function of our muscular system, is to move things, right? So for example, we've got our skeletal system, right? So our skeletal muscle is attached to our skeletal system, right? It moves our skeletal system because muscles will shorten in length, and that will pull bones in particular directions, right? We generate heat. Also helps with all sorts of other kinds of things, okay? So don't overthink it, guys. Let's go for questions. Okay? All right, so here's some cool random facts about our muscular system. Where is the clicker? Okay, so it comes from the Greek word for little mouse. You have approximately, you guys know this means approximately 650 skeletal muscle. Here's why we say approximately, as opposed to saying how many bones you have, because in theory, we should all have the exact same number of bones. Why do we say approximately 650 muscles?
There are different types of mutations in humans, like they've evolved differently.
Which will lead to what?
Different muscle.
Different muscles. Not everybody has the same exact number of muscles. So here's a good test for you guys. So what I want you guys to do is I want you to take your thumb and your middle finger together, okay, and I want you to flex your wrist. Who sees a tendon sticking up in their forearm? Does anybody see a tendon sticking up in their forearm? Raise your hand if you do. Okay. Nobody else? You'll notice it. Yeah. So if you have a tendon sticking up, you guys have a muscle. You have a muscle that other people don't have. It's called the palmaris longus. So the palmaris longus is what we would call an evolutionary holdover, right? So all of our primate ancestors have a palmaris longus. Only about a third of humans have a palmaris longus muscle, right? So that's one of the examples of differences in muscularity. So for example, there's another muscle called the adductor magnus. About a third of people have the adductor magnus. About 2/3 of people don't have the adductor magnus. Okay. So we have approximately 650 skeletal muscles. The small skeletal muscle is the stapedius. We learned about those three bones, the ossical bones, the malleus, incus, and stapes. So the stapedius is attached to your stapes muscle and helps dampen amplification of sound. Largest muscle is the gluteus maximus. Longest muscle is the sartorius, which is here on your leg. And the most active muscles are the external eye muscles. So we've got 4 what we call extrinsic eye muscles. So we got a superior, an inferior, and medial and lateral rectus. They allow you to look up, down, left, and right. More importantly, they geostabilize your eyes, right? You ever watch video when you're holding on your phone, right? That video's all jarred and jingled. How come that doesn't happen to us when we run? Our external eye muscles contract to help keep our eyes from wobbling around inside our head so they're not googly-eyed like Cookie Monster, right? And if you were able to contract all of the musculature in your body in one direction at one time, it could be up to 25 tons of force. Right, so the body has the ability to produce large amounts of force. You ever seen movies when like somebody touches like an electrical wire and they go flying across the room? What's doing that?
It's muscles.
It's the muscles, not the electricity, right? So the muscles are causing the muscles to contract. If that's so, right, so strongest human to ever live as far as like Olympic lifting is a guy from Iran who lifted a little over 600 pounds. So he, from here to here to here was a little over 600 pounds. So if he's the strongest, right, and then you got guys like the Mountain from Game of Thrones and those kind of guys, why can't we do this? Why can't some of us lift more than that? Like, why can't we pick up 1,000 pounds and throw it over our heads and stuff like that? If we have the ability to do so, why can't we? Why don't we do it?
Isn't it like certain distribution, like certain muscles distribute force at like?
So they do distribute force, right? So the main reason why we don't do this is neurological in nature. You heard those stories about, moms lifting cars off of their babies and stuff like that, right? Those stories are true, right? What they don't tell you about is what happened after the mom lifted the car off the baby.
They pass out.
Well, not only did they pass out, but what happened to them? They tore practically all the muscles in their body off the bone, maybe shattered their vertebrae, stuff like that, right? So our brain limits our body's ability to our muscles to exert force, because if we let it off the hook, right, we would tear muscles, we would damage joints and other sorts of kinds of things. So this is why we can't generate that kind of force, right? But we have the ability to do so. A lot of what we're doing in like sports performance training is to try and kind of dial back that governor just a little bit. Has anybody here tried to restrain somebody who's having a seizure? Right? Have you done it?
Well, it was an animal for me.
It was what?
An animal.
Okay, right. So if you try to restrain somebody who's having a seizure or even am on a seizure, it's incredibly difficult to do because that governor has been turned off. Has anybody here ever cared for a special needs person, like somebody with Down syndrome, who's having a really bad day and throws a temper? They're hard to hold on to, right? They're tough, right? They're pretty strong because they're very strong, right? They throw a temper tantrum. It's hard to hold on to them. Like you got a 9-year-old, Down syndrome kid, and they're thrashing around. They're hard to hold down because, right, that limiter is kind of turned off to a little bit. Okay? We're going to talk a little bit more about that throughout the course of this module. And if you're looking for a way to burn some extra calories, you're getting frustrated with this class or one of the other classes, banging your head against the wall can burn up to 150 calories an hour. So if you're looking for some novel ways to get yourself in shape. So now you know why all those heavy metal guys back in the day were so ripped. They were doing that all the time. Okay? All right. Now, when we think of muscle, right, we're often thinking about skeletal muscle, which is what we're going to mostly focus on in this chapter. But we are going to talk a little bit about cardiac muscle. Cardiac muscle will obviously get a lot more attention when we talk about the cardiovascular system. But there's actually 3 types of muscle within muscular tissue. So skeletal muscle is the only tissue in our musculoskeletal system, is the only part of our nervous system that is what we would call somatic or voluntary. Everything else that our brain and our nervous system is doing is autonomic, meaning it's subconscious, right? It's automatic, we're not controlling it. So the somatic part of our body is our skeletal system. We've already talked a little bit about smooth muscle. For example, we talked about the erector pili muscle, which is found in the dermis of your skin that causes goosebumps. Where else do you guys find smooth muscle? You guys think of some other places where smooth muscle is?
Your stomach.
Stomach, right? So our gastrointestinal system, so our esophagus, right? Stomach, intestines, right? Second, you swallow the food, right? You can't just choose not to swallow it, right? It's going to make its journey down. Where else?
I was gonna say esophagus.
Esophagus, right? So the digestive tract. Where else?
Would it be like any organ?
Well, many organs have it. So for example, our arteries and veins, especially our arteries, right? So we've got smooth muscle in the walls of our arteries. That's how we control the blood pressure, right? So for example, if I want to shunt blood from my arm to my stomach, what do? I vasoconstrict the muscles, the blood vessels in my arm, vasodilate the blood vessels in my stomach, right? What's going to happen? The blood's going to follow the path of least resistance, okay? So we got it in our cardiovascular system. What happened if I shine a pen light in your eye? What's going to happen to your pupil? It's going to constrict, right? So we've got smooth muscle in the iris of our eyes. So we got smooth muscle in lots of different places. And then, of course, cardiac muscle, right? Name self-explanatory. Okay. But again, we're going to focus mostly on skeletal muscle in this class. Okay. Like our bone, each individual muscle is in of itself an organ. What's an organ, guys? Two or more tissue types working together to perform a common function. Okay? So just like bone, you're going to find connective tissue, nervous tissue, blood, all sorts of kinds of like that. Matter of fact, your blood vessels are highly innervated, meaning lots of nerve endings, highly vascularized. Right? So they're all violent. Some are more so than others. We'll get into that with a little bit of detail. Your muscles are also incredibly dense and with lots and lots of connective tissue and layers and layers and layers of connective tissue, which we call fascia or fascia. Does anybody here hunt? Nobody? Anybody here skin an animal or seen an animal skin? Right.
Both from a different human anatomy
Yeah,
with
yeah.
the cat.
Incredibly difficult to get that skin out. Did you guys do cadaver stuff?
We just did a cat.
Cat, yeah. So, yeah. Did you guys peel the skin off and all that? Yeah. It's really difficult. It's really difficult to do, right? So, so your muscles have lots and lots and lots of fascia. If you took away the fascia, right, muscle would be massive. It would take up a lot of space. Okay. The connective tissue that is in our muscles turns into the connective tissue that is our tendons, which connects to the connective tissue of our bone, which is the periosteum of the bone. So if you tear a muscle, you're usually tearing it in the belly of the muscle, as opposed to tearing the bone muscle off the bone. It's incredibly difficult to have a muscle come clean off the bone, right? It's very, very difficult to do because those tendons have extreme amounts of what we call tensile strength, the ability to resist being pulled in one direction. Some of our muscles have broad sheets called aponeuroses. So for example, you can see here on your models here, we've got an aponeurosis here on the top of the skull. You can find one here on the back. Right, this is called the coracolumbar fascia. We have the IT band here as well too. And then we have fascia here on the front of the rectus abdominis. We got lots and lots of fascia. One could make the argument, and I in fact make this argument, that we don't actually have 650 muscles. We just have one muscle subsected into 650 sections, right? Who here has pulled or like really severely strained a muscle before? Right? Does it impact just that one muscle? No, right? So like you strain something in your back and then you, right, reach up to get a coffee mug out of the cabinet. What happens? Right? You're feeling it in your back. Why? Because the fascia from the muscles here is connected to the fascia here, which is connected to the fascia here, which is connected to the fascia there, right? So all of the muscles in your body are connected to one another. And what happens with one muscle impacts the other muscle. So if one muscle is sore or tight or dysfunctioning improperly, it's going to impact the other muscles in what we call the kinetic chain. Okay? Your muscles, again, because all that fascia, have different layers of fascia. Around the entire muscle is a connective layer called the epimysium. And then around individual bundles called fascicles, we've got perimysium. And then around individual myofibrils or motor fiber units, we have endomysium. Think of it like cable, right? So like if you ever go to like the Golden Gate Bridge, which is a suspension bridge, or the Brooklyn Bridge, it's a suspension bridge, right? So you got that cable that's kind of interconnected together, right? So you got individual wires, they got bundles of wires, and then bundles of wires put together. That's what's going on with your muscle, okay? So you have individual myofibrils, which have connective tissue around it, and then an individual fascicle that's got fascia around it, and then all of the bundles together have fascia around it. So you got fascia on top of fascia on top of fascia. Right? So that epimysium that you see there, that's what creates those aponeuroses that you see there. Like butcher shops, right? So what's the difference between the different cuts of meat? Why are some cuts of meat more expensive than others?
Because of the tenderness of the meat? The tenderness, like, of the muscle?
Why are some more tender than others? Like, why do we want meat from the underbelly of a pig or of a cow? Less fascia, right? So there's less fascia in the belly, so the meat's gonna be more tender versus like shoulder loin, which is gonna have lots of fascia, right? So it's a chewier cut of meat sort of a thing, right? So the more tender cuts of meat have got less fascia in them, right? And then butchers do a good job of cutting it up so there's less fascia in there. That's one I can keep from my trip. That's why, like, for example, ground meat is like easy to like work with because it's cutting up all the fascia and stuff like that. So. All right, so we got our individual myofibrils. Okay, so each fibril is going to be long and cylindrical, right? But it's still an individual cell. It has a cell membrane. So lemma means membrane. So sarcolemma was literally muscle cell membrane. Right? So sarco, we talked about that the first day of class. If you see the prefix sarco, that means muscle. Also, if you see the prefix myo, those also mean muscle. Sarco is Latin, myo is Greek. Okay? So underneath that, you're going to have the sarcoplasm, which is the cytoplasmic reticulum, or cytoplasm of the cell. And then you're going to find lots and lots and lots of mitochondria, and something that is unique to muscle fibers. Muscle fibers are the only ones that are multinucleated. You might have dozens of nuclei on one individual cell. Right? So it's unique among cells in the body. Only muscle cells can do that. It's going to be highly, lots of mitochondria, but within muscle fiber types, there are different types of muscle fiber tissue. Certain muscle fiber tissues are going to have more mitochondria than others. We'll get into that. We'll do kind of a quick thing about exercise physiology at the end of the module, or at the end of the chapter. Okay? And then you're going to have the sarcoplasm, which has the myofibrils. There are two myofibrils that are involved in contractile proteins. There's lots of other proteins, but we're going to focus on the contractile proteins. So we have a thick one called myosin. Kind of looks like golf clubs that have been twisted together. And then we got one called actin, which is kind of like a string of pearls. So here's how muscle action happens. Okay, so you have a functional unit called a sarcomere. We're going to watch a crash course video here in a second that's going to do a much better job of illustrating all of this than I am. I'm going to kind of give you a quick review. You have a sarcomere. So sarcomere extends from what's called one Z line to another Z line. Don't worry about that for now. You're going to have myofibrils. Okay, so the myosin heads are going to attach to the actin filament, and they're going to pull the actin filament towards it. So then each individual sarcomere is going to shorten or contract in length. That's why we call it a muscular contraction. As each neighboring sarcomere shortens in length, what happens to the length of the muscle? Muscle shortens or contracts as the muscle is attached to bone in two different spots. As the muscle shortens, it pulls one bone towards the other, causing a muscular action. Okay? So from a muscular standpoint, every muscle is a pulling muscle. Every muscle is pulling a bone in a particular direction. Okay? So for example, if you do like a push-up, right? What happens when you're doing a push-up? You're contracting, right? You're pulling this bone towards this bone, and you're pulling these bones towards this way, and that causes you to push the ground away. So every muscular action is some type of pulling. All right, so let's watch the crash course video. It does a really good job of explaining.